Today, the TCU secondary is going to be the strongest part of this team. I'm calling it right now. These corners, these safeties are really good. They're going to lead this defense. I have really no doubt about it. Also, some audience questions, audience feedback, and TCU basketball. They're playing some exhibition games in Europe. Today they were in London. I watched some of that game against Barking Abbey, and I'll have all my thoughts about the Frogs taking on a select team from London. That and more coming up next. It's right here on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel or subscribe wherever it is you get podcasts in their audio form. We're coming up on 750 subscribers on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at SimcockSteven. The show is at Locked On TCU. You can follow either of those accounts, and we try to keep it. I try to keep it mostly TCU on Twitter, and so things that you would care to see if you're following the show and following Locked On Horned Frogs. Practice continues to roll along. TCU is getting closer to opening the season against Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. Big noon kickoff on Fox. Huge national spotlight to start the year, coming off that great season where they went to the national championship game. And I've said this before, but I'm coming out with a bold take today. Maybe not the boldest take because I've sort of hinted around this for a while, but I really think the secondary is going to be the strongest part of the TCU football team. On offense, I like the parts that are there, but Chandler Morris, we haven't really seen him. We haven't seen him in a full-time starter role, shifting some parts on the offensive line. We discussed the running back room yesterday and some of the new faces that are there, the wide receivers. Again, you're kind of banking a lot on projection rather than production. You're losing Quentin Johnson. You're losing some of those inside guys like Tay Barber, Gunnar Henderson, Darius Davis. But they've backfilled nicely through the transfer portal and through the high school ranks. I won't run down all the names because if you've been listening to the show, but there's a bunch of exciting new faces on offense. On a defense, things are a little more consistent from last season. This linebacker room, you're returning a ton of players: Johnny Hodges, Jamoy Hodge, Shad Banks, Marshall Brooks, and Terrence Cooks, Thomas Armstrong, all those guys coming back from injury. There are a lot of really good moving pieces on that side of the ball in that position room that I think are going to be great players. Defensive line is a huge question. But this secondary, man, like Josh Newton last year was fantastic. Travis Hodges-Tomlinson won the Thorpe Award, but Newton was great. I'm super excited about Avery Helm on the other side, the Florida transfer. You got a couple corners from the JUCO ranks in Shannon Canada and Mason White that have made some noise in practice so far and appear to be like long, rangy, athletic players who could step in if they need to in a nickel or dime situation, or just to give, those two starters a spell from time to time. And then pretty much all your safeties are back. You got Bud Clark coming back, Millard Bradford, Mark Perry, Josh Foster making a push here, it appears, in fall camp. He's been practicing with the ones a lot. So that is an interesting development. I'll be curious to see what happens as we get closer to the game and where he ends up on the depth chart. But overall, really good stuff from TCU across the board. But in the secondary, this group has a chance to be special. Josh Newton talked to the media today. And I'll tell you, Josh Newton's the best quote from a TCU player we've had in a long time. Gary Patterson was pretty buttoned down with the media as far as when you got player availability. It was middle of the week and then after games. And those guys, they, for the most part, would kind of just go into coach speak. Sam Carter was a good quote when I was, covering the team when I was there. And I think Sam is at Arkansas now. I know he's a defensive coach somewhere in college football. But he would dive into coach speak pretty regularly. Davion Pearson was a great quote. He was a little more off the handle and would kind of say whatever was on his mind. But I feel like that 2014 season, they kind of cooled down on Davion's media appearances after they won that Oklahoma game because he had some fairly wild things to say. But point being, Josh Newton is a dude that just inspires, right? Like if you follow the team last year, you probably saw his speech before the Texas game. He fires this group up. He's a leader, And so it was fun to hear from him today. And Stephen Johnson from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram gave us kind of a taste of some of those quotes that he brought, but some interesting things that he brought to the table, talking about that secondary room and some of the additions. Josh Newton said corners like Avery Helm, Shannon Kanda, and Mason White are growing into great men, and they come from good families. Said they're good listeners. They want to learn, get reps, and even make mistakes. And Fig says that's the only way you learn. I don't think this is going to be a huge transition for Avery Helm. I mean, he's been doing this now for a while. He's been playing at a high level in the SEC. So aside from getting some terminology down maybe and kind of getting a better feel for what they want him to do in this defense, I don't have many questions about him. Now, Canada and White, if they can come in and be contributors, then that's a big deal because it allows you to, switch guys out when you need to. It allows you to go some different formations and different looks on defense. You can have some secondary heavy sets to cover on 3rd and long and things of that nature. And, a big part of this is going to be the defensive line and the front seven finding a way to get pressure because no matter how good your corners are, it's tough to cover people forever. But, I mean, this is a really good group. And Joe Gillespie has made it a point. This cornerback room has changed a lot over the past year. I think he's made the point to go get long, athletic guys who can make plays. And Brian Smith was talking to us about the other day. He was like, this is sort of just the way of the world now in college football and in football in general. Obviously you want great athletes, but you want guys who can contest throws even if they're a step or two behind, right? Like if that ball's up in the air and you're not in perfect position, make up for it with your length, with that ability to just reach out and swat the ball away because, of your frame and your size, you have the ability to just go get it. And also, I think strength. And the fascinating thing about that, too, is Travis Hodges-Tomlinson really doesn't fit that description, but he was a really good in press man coverage and in being physical, and Newton and Helm are the same way. And they're also really fast. And so they can turn their hips and run stride for stride with receivers in a way that some players can't really do that at the same level. And so I'm super excited about this corner room. One other thing that he said that caught my eye, and Chandler Morris apparently said this too. Chandler Morris spoke with the media after practice today. But Stephen Johnson from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, he said Josh Newton said he thanked Sonny Dykes for bringing Jaylon Robinson to the program and said he loves going against him. He said, and I quote, "If I can cover him, I can cover anybody." So that's high praise because, Josh went up against some of the best receivers in the country last year. And so he sees that type of potential in Jaylon Robinson. Jaylon Robinson's story, he was at UCF. Back in 2020, he had almost 1,000 yards receiving and a lot of touchdowns in a shortened season. Then in 2021, he transferred. TCU wanted him. He ends up at Ole Miss. Didn't do a whole lot at Ole Miss, was injured, but hit the portal again, ends up at TCU this time. And now they call him Flash because he's so fast, and he's going to be right there for TCU football in the mix at that receiver position this year. And so he's another one of those guys. You're sort of banking on some conditions to fall into place. You're banking on some outside factors like injury history to not be a factor this season, but they like what he can do. And Chandler Morris talked about it too. He said about Jaylon Robinson that he's been one of the guys making plays, and he mentions how familiar Robinson is with the offense already. So another name to know in that receiver room. There's a lot of guys that we feel like can be great. It's just a matter of who's going to step up and actually do it when the games start. But if Jaylon Robinson is healthy, he is a fast guy, and he can get after it. One more Josh Newton quote that I want to share just because it's funny to me. He said he texted TCU cornerbacks coach Carlton Buckles and told him to keep coaching his tail off, and that he sees how much he's improved as a player since he came to Fort Worth. So high praise for Coach Buckles, who was one of the coaches that I feel like we haven't really heard a lot about since he came over to TCU, but did a great job last season with the cornerback room and appears to be doing the same thing this year with Josh Newton and company. When we come back, I'll have an update on a Gary Patterson story, and then we'll get to some audience questions because you guys have had some feedback. I feel like I haven't been able to get to some of those things because we've been running around with fall camp and other news going on. So we'll talk about that next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. you can't mess around with your car, man. It's one of those things like you can't go cheap on it. You don't want to get the wrong thing. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. Same thing with your vehicle. You can't take shortcuts when it comes to your car, so you need the right parts and accessories. And if you need that, go to eBay Motors. eBay has a guaranteed fit program that allows you to get the right part you need the first time around. You can add your ride to My Garage, and then if you see the green check mark, you know the part will fit, or you can get your money back. ebaymotors.com. Again, that's ebaymotors.com. That's where you go. It's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. So I can't remember when I discussed this. I feel like it was a couple weeks ago, maybe. Chip Brown had a story. Chip Brown, who covers Texas for 247 Sports, he had a story about Gary Patterson coming back to Texas. And at the time, he was like, hey, this is official. And I retweeted the story. I read through it. Steve Sarkisian had said, we want him to be part of the team this year. And then they kind of backed off that, and Chip Brown walked it back and said, well, the invitation's open from Sark for Gary Patterson to come back to Texas, but he hasn't accepted it yet. And so I've been just sort of, keeping an eye on things. I know some of you guys, like, because of the way things ended with GP, don't always want to know about him, but I'm still always curious on what he's going to do. And I think obviously him being on the staff of one of TCU's opponents is really crucial information for TCU people to know. But as of now, Gary Patterson has not returned to Austin. I actually saw him on the field. So not like some people brag about getting blocked by folks on Twitter. This is not that. Gary blocked me like a couple seasons ago. I was pretty vocal about it was time to move on during that 2021 season. And anyway, he blocked me on social media, so I don't always see updates from him anymore. But I noticed that he was at practice, at New Mexico State's practice, and gave a speech to the team. And, of course, if you didn't know, Jerry Kill is the head coach at New Mexico State. Him and Gary are longtime friends, and he was on staff at TCU in that very bizarre sort of head coach of the offense, analyst position, then took over as interim head coach when Gary left, or the school party ways with Gary. And, Jerry Kill's done an outstanding job. Like, they won a bowl game at New Mexico State last year. That's a program that was just dead to rights, and he has sort of resurrected this thing. He's found ways to turn them into, a respectable team again, which is really cool. And, of course, his story, like, he was the head coach of Minnesota, had some health problems, came to TCU to sort of reset, and now has moved on and has his own program. So that's really cool. But what does this mean? I can't say anything officially yet because, it sounded like from what Sark said, basically Gary could roll in the door on Monday of the first game week, and they would be like, all right, yeah, we have something for you to do. But I'm starting to be doubtful that he's going to be part of that Texas staff this upcoming season because fall camp's going on right now. And even though he's just an analyst and mainly he's going to be breaking down film, doing kind of big picture, busy work, that type of thing, I don't get the impression that he's going to be part of that Texas staff. And, that's somewhat notable because last season, I think he was a huge part of what Texas did on defense against TCU and holding them to 17 points. And ultimately, TCU won the game. Joe Gillespie and his defense played their tails off that night, and they were physical, and they got the job done. But, I think Gary had a huge impact on what they were trying to do from a defensive perspective as far as Texas goes last year in that game against the Frogs. Okay, so some audience reactions, some audience questions. You guys have sent in some things recently that I want to make sure I get to here. We talked about running backs on Thursday, and, what does this running back room look like? Guys like Amani Bailey, Trey Sanders. Trey Sanders was back at practice today, and he's been out a few days here and there because of what they call load management. They're trying to limit his touches. He's still coming back from those injuries that he sustained in that car accident a few years back. And so Tanner McKinney said, I think at the moment, the true running back is Sanders. Bailey does have speed, but he's not patient. Battle has hands, but we've yet to see what he can do in the run game. And as much as I hype up Cam Cook, I've never seen him play a game, so I don't have a lot to say about him. I could see Trey Sanders being your starter. I think it's going to be pretty much 50-50 when the year starts. Like, I think both Sanders and Bailey are going to get their opportunities, and it'll honestly be up to who just kind of emerges. I'm not sure if Sanders is at a place where he can handle like 20 carries a game, just because they're limiting his touches and the contact he takes in practice. But if he is, he could be a special player. I said I like the patience that he shows in the run game. I think it's really just a factor of him getting that athleticism, explosiveness, and burst back to a place, where he can make people miss and get going in the open field. Bailey has those traits. Like, he's got the explosiveness. I'm not sure if I would say he's not patient, but I kind of have to watch some of the moments from his season last year, Tanner. But I think I get where you're coming from. He's somebody that wants to just go, right? Like, get the ball and hit the hole and find room. And sometimes you have to sort of shuffle your feet or move down the line of scrimmage before you can pick and choose and work your way through the traffic at the line of scrimmage. So I understand what you mean, Tanner. But yeah, I feel like it's still a toss-up. And some of those other guys you mentioned, Battle and Wren, I think there's a place for them, but I feel like they're both kind of scat back types, like guys that they're going to use in the receiving game and maybe some different fun ways, but I can't see them being downhill runners consistently. And then Cam Cook is a wild card because you're right, he's a true freshman. He's a special talent in high school, but this is a step up. And so, we'll see what happens when the game starts. I'm not sure who this is. CJSO is the username here on YouTube. He said you can make the argument that Coach Jones is the best running back coach in the nation. I think he will get the absolute best out of these boys, and Sanders has a breakout season. Cam and Bailey will look good as well. Coach Jones is a great coach, and that's a good point that I didn't bring up yesterday. Anthony Jones is a great recruiter, came over from Memphis, has Tennessee roots, has done a really outstanding job with the running back since he got on campus. I think he was a big factor in what Miller and DeMercado did last season. And so, that's definitely true that he's a fantastic coach. And I feel like he'll have these guys ready for the upcoming year. Sonny's great at identifying talent in the coaching ranks. He had Rashad Samples, who was a star, and is now at Arizona State. And Rashad leaves for an NFL job before the season starts, and he goes and gets Anthony Jones immediately. And he's done a really great job of replacing talent on that coaching staff when he has had to, which has been frequently. Zoom Play said it's the best running back room in the country. As usual, Zoom Play, you are more positive than me, but I love the optimism. I would love to, come on here in a few months and say that's absolutely true. There's some unproven players here, but I think there's definitely talent and guys that could be, special and get to a place where they are really good as the year goes on. Matt Clark says, as much as we may dislike, I also talked about the SMU-TCU rivalry. SMU was trying to get into the ACC. It looks like that's not going to happen as of now. ACC really wasn't able to get any footing when it came to expansion, whether it be with Stanford and Cal or with SMU. He says, much as we may dislike SMU, there is no more school like TCU anywhere than SMU. Having SMU at the Power 5 level promotes much of what TCU stands for. Yeah, there's definitely similarities there, and there is a regional aspect of that rivalry that we are losing with college football becoming more of a national sport and all these different, super conferences that are cropping up. And so I would like to see the rivalry continue. I know people have strong feelings about it, and I totally get why it's in some ways it's a lose-lose situation for TCU. It's not a resume-building win, but it's a game that if you lose, it looks bad. It kind of hampers your season. And I think in the last 2 years that GP was here, those losses to SMU really weighed heavily on the team moving forward because it just kind of takes the wind out of your sails when you lose to that team. But I agree with you. I think the schools are similar. It's a historical rivalry, and if there's a way to keep it intact in some form or fashion, they should do it. We also talked recruiting with Brian Smith a few days ago. Vincent Pryor, we were talking about, star rankings and TCU going after more under-the-radar players lately. He said University of Texas specifically gets high school talent that has peaked. TCU is famous for finding potential teams, players, and kids who have a chip on their shoulder. It's also why Gary is famous for saying, I have done more with less, when they compared TCU's recruiting classes to UT. I think I remember that quote. I remember a variation of that quote, Tanner. Not Tanner, Vincent. When TCU was playing Texas in 2015, and it was pregame, there were a lot of injuries, and they were interviewing Gary before the game, and they were kind of running down the guys that were out for that particular game. And he was like, yeah, well, we've beat them with less, which was a really funny comment. and kind of uncharacteristically cocky from Gary. And then they went out and hung 50 on the Horns. I think they won that game 50-7. So he was right. Like they did win with less that day. I feel like it's a mix, right? TCU has done a good job through the years, and Sonny Dykes has continued this of finding players with big-time athletic traits that might not, have the same star ranking as some of the bigger name players in the country. It's also been proven that you need to land highly rated players and acquire them as much talent as possible to compete at a high level when we're talking about winning national championships. So I think it's a mix of both, but you're totally right, man. Like TCU has made a living out of finding kids that are motivated, that have tools that maybe are just being undersold or undervalued, and finding a way to maximize that and get them to a place where they are playing at a high level. When we come back, TCU basketball's in Europe right now playing some exhibition games, and I actually got it on the TV right now, so I'm watching that, and we'll talk about it next here in Locked On Horned Frogs. Going a different direction in our final segment. TCU basketball has been on an overseas trip there in Europe. I feel like in the last few years, this used to be a thing that just a few blue bloods would do, like a few schools here and there. Some of the top schools in the country would take their basketball teams overseas for some of these exhibition games. But now it feels like everybody does it, and it totally makes sense. I mean, one, it gives you an opportunity to see your players in the offseason in game-like situations, and that's not just an inter-squad scrimmage. And it also gives you a chance to let the team bond and come together and get closer on a long trip like this. And so it's a really cool idea, and it's been executed well by TCU. And today I just happened to see that they are playing Barking Abbey, which is a select team in London, and the game was live on YouTube. And so I turned it on and I watched the first half. They're currently in the fourth quarter as I'm recording this. TCU is up 85-64 on Barking Abbey with 7:27 left in the fourth quarter. And so I get it. Like it's I don't know how good Barking Abbey is. It's very clear that TCU is much more athletic and much better than them. So it's hard to just come on here and be like, this is definitely what the TCU basketball team looks like. But hey, it's a game-like situation. And some things that I noticed that sort of caught my eye. One thing is Ernest Uday, for the Kansas transfer, is a large person. Follow me for more analysis. But he looks so big on the court. He is a legit 7-footer. And in the last few years, even guys like Eddie Lampkin, they don't look as big and as lanky and as athletic as Ernest does. He can jump out of the gym. I mean, he looked dominant at times today. Didn't get the ball a ton, but when he did, threw down a vicious dunk, had a block, had a couple fouls because he was just jumping up and over people. But he's a special talent, man. I mean, like that was such a huge pickup to land him in the transfer portal. He gives them, at the very least, a defensive stopper and a rim runner that they've been missing and sorely missed last year. But he's a special player. And so that mix with him and Cork is going to be fun to watch. But he was all over the place. He had a steal and a lay-in. Like you could just tell he was having fun. He was clearly kind of the most athletic and explosive player for his size on the court today. Also, a lot of different players handling the ball. One thing that I noticed, Micah Peavy was catching the ball and immediately making a decision, taking the ball to the rack. And Mike is a special athlete. Like he has that ability to use his athleticism to get to the rim. I mean, it's just about, can he finish, can he handle the ball and not turn it over? And of course, against this level of competition, he was able to kind of have his way whenever he wanted, but he was getting to the rim with ease. He looks like he's fully healthy. Last season was kind of a wash for Micah because he was so banged up at times, but he is a great, great defender. I know he said he wants to be the best defender in the Big 12 this year, best wing defender in the Big 12. And if they can get some more from him offensively, and that's a huge plus. Trey Tennyson, the Texas A&M Corpus Christi transfer, looks really smooth shooting the basketball. He can shoot the three. There was a sequence in the second quarter of today's game where he took the ball, coast to coast, like brought it up, stopped on a dime at the top of the key at the three-point line and splashed a three. And, man, having that type of guy that can create his own shot out the dribble and shoot from distance is something TCU was sorely missing last season outside of Mike Miles and Damian Ball. So Tennyson looks good. He looks smooth. He's got a really good shot. Avery Anderson looks fast and explosive. He hit a big three, and his shot looked pretty smooth. He didn't shoot the ball well last season, but looked pretty good shooting the ball today, and then also was able to get to the rim with these. James Posey, the freshman, played. They had everybody playing today, but when he played, he looked like an athlete. Didn't see a ton of Jameer Nelson Jr. when I was watching closely, and it's on in the background now, but I know he's had a good, run here in some of these exhibition games. He looked like he was being a pass-first point guard today. They were running a lot of pick-and-roll action with him at the top of the key or on the wings, and he was just sort of searching and looking for those big men and looked smooth handling the ball. But this is a talented group. I mean, I'm not ready to say like they're going to be better this year because I feel like Mike Miles, we won't really feel his absence until these games start. And it's not just what he did in the scoring department. And I honestly think they landed some guys that can replace his production from a scoring standpoint. But he made the offense. He made everybody's job easier on offense because he was just he was so good. He demanded so much attention. And the defense would just converge on him. And so it made everybody else, have the ability to move around freely and get things done. I've talked a lot about the newcomers. Some guys that returned. Emmanuel Miller looked comfortable. I mean, he looked like he knew what he wanted to do. His jump shot wasn't having the best day shooting from the mid-range, but, a couple times he caught the ball and quickly spun to the rack and was very decisive. And Jacoby Coles looks good. And Jacoby's kind of, I mean, he could be one of your leading scorers this year. He really emerged last season as someone that they could count on. And he should be playing at the 3 or the 4 instead of the 5 like he was last year. He was playing out of position a lot last season, but he can shoot the ball. He can put it on the deck. I think he has the chance to be really good as long as he can improve as the year goes on. So fun to watch these guys play. Again, I don't know the level of competition. And as I'm wrapping up here, they're up 89-67 on Barking Abbey with about 6 minutes left in this contest. But they played a lot of guys, as you would expect. In an exhibition game situation, a lot of different players came in and scored in this game. And so excited for basketball as well, but it's football season right now. We'll have more on the football team on Monday. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, and it's your team every day.